is a project we're doing at UCL CASA in London, and it's a project with Stephen Gray. I'm just trying to see if he's in the audience. There you are. Excellent. So I'm going to pick on you a couple of times during the talk. And Andy Hudson-Smith is our boss. He's a director of CASA. So if you looked at the abstract for his talk, it's rather vague, and it doesn't really say what we're doing. So hopefully this presentation will give some insight into what the project actually is. So I'm going to talk about the project and then how it links with OpenStreetMap, data sources that you can use to put into the GEMMA system and what you can get out from it. And we're going to focus on the OpenStreetMap part of GEMMA, the feature highlighter, and give you some examples, and then finally we'll mash it up and show the reason why we've got a project that does these sorts of things. So here's a screenshot from UCL CASA. Steve spent a couple of hours one evening basically adding light effects to the lightsabers to make it look more realistic. One guy unfortunately is actually grabbing the lightsaber, which is probably not a good thing. But I'm somewhere in the back and Steve's in the middle. So GEMMA Project is a small project. We have lots of projects at CASA. We generally have more projects than people. Some of these projects are multi-year projects, but GEMMA is quite a small project. And basically what it is it's going to take a number of our existing geospatial web applications and sort of combine them together, so-called Web 2.0-ize them, as it were, make them more up-to-date because some of them are quite old, take advantage of the huge amounts of data that's now coming out in the UK and across Europe and the world, and basically create one single place where we can take these sources of data and do cool things with them, and also start to think about mobile development as well, because traditionally we haven't been particularly active in that. So, I don't need to tell you already that OpenStreetMap is a rich global source of spatial data, but it's an increasingly rich global source as well. The project is very, very much growing all the time. Actually, as I'll mention later on, it's causing some issues with where we pull in the data because there's so much data pouring into the project at the moment. But this is probably the first CASA project that's really using the OpenStreetMap dataset, which is pretty bad really, because I think Steve Coast was either at CASA, he's certainly involved in setting up one of our servers, and until recently almost all the infrastructure for OpenStreetMap was hosted at UCL. So the fact that, at least in the CASA research group, we're not really doing so much research with OpenStreetMap is a shame. And it's nice to be able to get this short project where we can actually start to use OpenStreetMap and other data sets. Traditionally, us academics have had free access to very expensive data sets with restrictions, and so we tend to use those, and it's really nice that we can use this data set on a level playing field with everybody else and do some cool things with it. So, as part of using OpenStreetMap in the GEMMA project, we basically want to have a copy of the OpenStreetMap database so we can do cool things with it, and ideally a near live copy of OpenStreetMap. Now this used to be quite straightforward to do. It's fiddly to set it up. Once you had it set up, you could basically have a near live copy of OpenStreetMap. That was until about May last year when the Bing aerial imagery went live, and it's now rather difficult to run a server which is updating OpenStreetMap from a minute-by-minute basis, simply because the database is so big and there's so many updates happening to it all the time. So for this particular project, because it's a UK-focused project, we're going to try and have the UK data, or possibly European data, updated on a near-live basis. And then anybody who wants to use a project anywhere else in the world will use a copy that's fairly up-to-date. So thinking for GEMMA, sort of the subtitle for GEMMA is making maps even easier. So the idea is we wanted to have a UI that's really, really simple. Always very tempting to add features because we can, but it's like, should we really add these features? We can understand these features and use these features, but if we want as many people as possible to use this project, we really want to sort of strip down the features. And that's really difficult to do because when we are ultimately programmers, not user experience experts. Having said that, Steve looked at this slide and hang on, I used to do user experience, don't say that. So I might have to delegate some of the design work to Steve because he is a bit of a UX legend apparently. And the other thing is we didn't want to create yet another web application where you need to create an account, log in with yet another password in theory to keep it secure. So we're using Twitter and Facebook logins and Google account. Now, possibly controversial because effectively we're mandating that if you really want to use our application, you need to have a Twitter account or a Facebook account or a Google account. And it's probably fair to say almost everybody does these days, but not everybody does. So it's maybe a bit controversial, and OpenID is perhaps another way to do it. When you log on to OpenStreetMap itself now, it presents you with a number of OpenID providers. Now, of course, Google is OpenID provider themselves. And we don't want to store your data either, because you're responsible for your data, and you probably just don't want to get another copy of your data go onto another web service. So the idea is the data stays with the person that's using the application, and we actually they can use Google Fusion tables, for instance, or other sources of data. And hopefully no pins on a map, because it's so many applications out there that basically just show lots of pins on a map. And we're trying not to compete with some pretty nice but very sophisticated online web GIS applications. So I'm going to mention a few of those applications that we're trying not to compete with. GeoCommons is, I think, probably the most impressive example, because you can do some pretty sophisticated analysis of multiple sources of geospatial data. The GEMMA Project, which is also known as CrowdMap, is another very impressive project which is taking in data and visualizing it in the example shown here, an OpenStreetMap map. Ollie White produced one of the OSM static map APIs as well, where you just take in data and display that data on an OpenStreetMap. And in the UK we have the ITO map, which does quite a few of the similar things to GEMMA, in that it takes some defined data sources and highlights those on OpenStreetMap, such as places in the UK where you've contributed to the map, or where there's roads with missing speed limits, or waterways which are missing certain tags which are useful to the project. EpiCollect is quite an interesting one. It's basically a way to record using mobile devices data and then add them to a map. So I'm going to talk in more detail about the data sources shortly, in particular the ones CASA MapTube and CASA Survey Mapper. These are two CASA products which we're basically trying to integrate into GEMMA. But OpenStreetMap itself is a key data source as well, and we really want to take advantage of the huge amount of data that's there. But you can contribute your own data directly, and that's through Google Fusion tables or Google spreadsheets. And also all those government data stores that are starting to appear now are also very rich sources of data. And we're even building our own data collector as well. And this HTML table grabber, I just added this in at the end because this is a potentially interesting feature where you visit a website and then it will automatically look at HTML tables on that website and try and construct a set of data from those tables. And then outputs from GEMMA, well, you can get an image with your data on a map, which you can post on a blog or wherever. But also an embeddable splitting map. So again, you can have a sort of functionality of being able to zoom around the map and click on features and see. But for me, the output that I'm most interested in is PDF, because what I really want to do is be able to take my mashed up data and stick it in a report and print out a report and have a nice high quality map. And I think some of the web-only interfaces for many applications don't allow you to very easily produce a high quality map that's print quality. And with using MapNic, and particularly MapNic's Cairo outputs, you can quite easily produce quite nice PDFs of OpenStreetMap and other data that's being fed into GEMMA. We're also going to have a website where you can view the data and a mobile version as well. So, a couple more mentions of those CASA products that we're going to incorporate into GEMMA. We have this product called MapTube, which is, I suppose you could say it's a YouTube for maps. And it's been around for a little while now, and the idea is simply you have a CSV or other spatial data, and you can basically just draw a thematic map of that data. So this map on the top left is ASB's, that's antisocial behaviour incidents in London. If you don't know London, the feature which I've clicked is on the far west, and that's Heathrow Airport, where not many people live, obviously, around Heathrow Airport, but there's a lot of there's a lot of antisocial behaviour incidents because there's just a lot of people moving through the airport. And this map's basically showing you the hotspots in London. And on the right, Survey Mapper, which is Steve's main product at CASA, where this allows you to answer a survey like SurveyMonkey, but you then also say where you live or where you are, and it automatically generates this map showing the latest responses to that survey. This particular one was showing broadband speeds in the east of England. The reason why we choose this example quite a lot is it got featured on the BBC, one of their regional programs, and so a lot of people went on and voted. Unfortunately, some people also added comments about some of the broadband operators, which caused them to get a little bit upset, and so we had to quite quickly take down those comments, but you know. So this is a quick screenshot of part of GEMMA. Now, as I say on the top right, I do appreciate this is actually pretty ugly, this UI. The project is not quite at its halfway stage yet. We've got a lot of programming still to do, and we've got a lot of user experience design to do as well. So I would imagine that when we launch GEMMA later this year, it will hopefully look a lot prettier than this. But the main thing is you've got a sort of virtual sheet of paper in the middle, and that sheet of paper is in this case showing features in OpenStreetMap which are tagged as footways in red, and features in OpenStreetMap that are tagged as paths in blue. This is a bit of a sore point to some people in OpenStreetMap because there's never really been a defined way to tag a path. Should it be a footway, as you tend to get in Potlatch, or some people think a path should just be a path. And you can see there's this particular region where everything is a path, and another particular region where everything is a footway. And we're just using GEMMA here to basically show there's potentially a problem with the data here. So quick mention about the tech. Using OpenLayers, of course. Using MapLink 2, mainly because I've been hearing some things about MapLink 2, and it's got some quite cool new functionality in it, such as the new marker symbolizer options. However, I actually had to do a little bit of patching in C++ in order to expose those options in the Python bindings, and that's not something I've done before. So my first ever C++ work was basically just to get this working, which is quite exciting. The meta writers talk yesterday, I found that very interesting because that potentially would be a very, very interesting capability of MapLink, which I want to include in GEMMA, because if we're basically just going to show where features are, allowing people to be able to click on those features and confirm that they are what they are, I think will be very powerful. And the base map, I'm currently just using the regular OpenStreetMap map, but ideally I'm going to use a special map which doesn't distract from the data you're showing on top, a so-called light context map. So here's another picture of OpenStreetMap data in GEMMA. So here I'm showing all the features in central London which have a word street in them, and all the features in central London have a word road in them. And it's quite interesting to show that in the middle of London, pretty much all the roads are called streets. And as soon as you go out beyond what we call Zone 1 in London, which is basically the main central business district, pretty much all the roads are called roads. And it's a little quirk I've just never noticed before. But using GEMMA here, where we colour the streets orange and the roads blue. Here's another one, various supermarket brands in the UK. We have Lidl. Now, I know you get Lidl around here as well. Lidl has a bit of a reputation in the UK of being the ultimate budget supermarket, whereas Waitrose has a reputation of being a supermarket where posh people go and shop. And here I'm basically trying to show different parts of London have dominance of different stores. So green is Waitrose, and the blue is Lidl. And you see Lidl pretty much dominates in East London, and Waitrose dominates in West London, because traditionally East London is poorer than West London. And that's where they choose to site their supermarkets. Oxford versus Cambridge in London. These are all the features in London which have a word Oxford in them and have a word Cambridge in them. Now, obviously, London's most famous shopping street is called Oxford Street, and that shows up as a red line right in the middle. And then in the east, we have Cambridge Heath, which is showing up as a green line. But it's quite interesting just to see what these features are. And if we use those MapLink meta writers, then we'll be able to click on each of those features and find out there's a pub called the Oxford, or it's a street called Cambridge Road. And it's just interesting to see where these two names, about both the same distance from London, what features in London they influence. Here's another one. This is kind of like that supermarket example, but here we're doing Greggs versus Pret. These are two big sandwich chains in the UK. Again, Greggs is known for being not particularly healthy, but very cheap to get your sandwiches from, whereas Pret has a sort of sophisticated reputation, perhaps. On the left, I picked Birmingham, a city of 2.5 million in the middle of England, and on the right, London. The scale is about the same. The red is Pret, and the green is Greggs. So in Birmingham, basically everybody eats their sandwiches at Greggs, whereas in London, because of the city and everybody earns lots of money and therefore is happy to spend all that money on Pret sandwiches, and Greggs just have a much less of a showing. But look at that density of Prets in London, and there's only one Pret in the whole of Birmingham. There's actually a road, you can probably see that red line. There's a road called Pret. Pret is something, I presume. It's a bit strange. Okay, anybody in the UK, if I said roundabouts, where would you think I'm talking about? Where's the most famous roundabouts in the UK? Anyone? Yes, Milton Keynes, of course. Here's a map of Milton Keynes, an OpenStreetMap. I'm quite keen about this map because I organise a mapping party and we got loads of people along, it was all good fun. But here I'm showing all the roundabouts in Milton Keynes. And there aren't perhaps quite as many as you might think, but there are quite a lot. In blue I'm showing junction equals roundabout, and in red I'm showing features which have a name that contains a word roundabout. So this suggests to the local OpenStreetMap community that you're doing quite well, but there are some places where you've just called it so-and-so roundabout, but you haven't actually marked it as being a roundabout. So there's some data quality improvements possible there. It also shows that you can actually go right through Milton Keynes without meeting a roundabout, if you drive carefully. This pretty intense map is a map that's close to my heart, being part of the London OpenStreetMap meetup community, because this is showing the coverage of buildings in London, where we're showing all the roads in red and all the buildings in yellow. On the left I'm showing all those roads. On the right I'm showing just residential roads. That's roads where high equals residential, because obviously there's roads going through parks, but there's no houses. So if there's a lot of red but no blue, that's a real sign that there's buildings still to be added, because there's residential roads but no buildings on those roads. And you can see in the centre of London we've pretty much done the buildings, and there's a big data import in South London. And right in the very far north is Enfield, where Steve Chilton hails from. And Steve's spent much time, along with other people up there, in completing all the buildings in Enfield. But you can see we've still got a lot of work to do in London. Here's Vienna. So again, large parts of central Vienna are covered with buildings, but there's plenty of chunks still to do, and these show up as the absence of green areas. So that's the OpenStreetMap part of MapTube. I'm just going to finish off by mashing up some of those data, and these are just sort of static examples. What I showed you before, we can use now with the alpha version of GEMMA, but here I'm just mocking these up because we've still got to do this work. This is mashing up the locations of Tesco's, which is a supermarket in the UK, with population density in East London, and showing some towns such as Brentwood, which is a very nice town just east of London, which doesn't have any Tesco stores. Here's a mashup of Survey Mapper, where we asked people, are you going to buy any tickets for the London Olympics next year? And I've superimposed all the features in OpenStreetMap with the word Olympic in them. We didn't actually get enough data from the survey to really make an interesting map here. So it doesn't really tell you whether people nearby did buy tickets or didn't buy tickets. But there's certainly potential for more popular surveys to show some interesting features. Here's another one, another survey, should bike helmets be compulsory? And we're showing all the cycleways. And here I was trying to identify are there certain counties which don't provide many cycleways, and then have a sort of insistence on wearing helmets or not. Is there a correlation or not? Like I say, again with this survey, we haven't really got enough data to be able to answer that question, but potentially using GEMMA we could combine both data sources to perhaps produce a hypothesis. Quick sneak peek at some more GEMMA. We have a mobile app data collector which Steve has programmed himself on the right, and on the left we've got our portal which we're building at the moment. And sticking with the cycling in London theme, there's a lot of debate in London right now over whether London is a cycling city, and the people who use our bike sharing scheme, who are these people? There's a quote here which basically says, it looks like the scheme is being used by overwhelmingly white men aged between 25 and 44, many of whom earn more than £50,000, 60,000 euros a year. Can we really justify spending this money on a posh boy toy? But there's a shortage of data because there's been very few surveys carried out about who is exactly using the scheme and where. So potentially for GEMMA we could acquire data on the demographic, we could visualize it, and we could combine it with those other data sources I mentioned to basically show graphically whether or not this statement is true. It's a big debate. And potentially with GEMMA, as I say, we could use OpenStreetMap to get locations of the bikes and cycleways in London. We can use a data collector to record the demographic, and we can use other data sources to try and understand the sorts of people who live in those areas and work in those areas, and try and work out whether or not those sort of statements are true or not. So GEMMA, we have a website for GEMMA, but it is still in private alpha, and we're hoping to launch it in autumn this year. And that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have questions? No questions at all? Okay. So, thank you, Oliver.